This NBA season had historically high scoring numbers. Guys are dropping 50, 60, 70 easily on what felt like a weekly basis. We had never seen NBA offenses operate as efficiently at such a high level as they were this season, and then something changed. Leading up to the All-Star break, everything was fine, and then ever since then, scoring is down significantly across the board. This is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to see a dramatic statistical shift from one week to the next within a single NBA season. Presumably, everything is the same. Yes, it's after the All-Star break. Some teams aren't playing as good of players now, but normally we see actually more scoring post All-Star break. The effort is lower. Teams are just trying to get to the postseason, but scoring was down so significantly after the All-Star break that the NBA actually had to put out a statement about it. Well, one of the biggest reasons that scoring has continued to increase in the league, not just this year, but over the last couple of seasons, is, of course, incredible amount of offensive talent and shooting around the league. Guys are hitting shots from places they never did before at a higher rate, more efficiently. There's more threes. Scoring has continued to increase basically on an annual basis for the last couple of seasons as the league has continued to get more and more efficient offensively. But the other big part of this, and the thing that really reached its peak this season, was fouls and guys getting to the free throw line, and specifically offensive initiated contact. And a lot of these conversations started to happen as we led up to the All-Star break. There were just too many plays where guys were getting to the rim and initiating contact with the defender and then flailing backwards and getting a foul call, getting to the free throw line. Guys were getting to the line a ton. Now, also, guys are driving to the rim a ton, which is good for the league. But generally speaking, there was starting to be this conversation around the league that fouls and guys getting to the free throw line was getting way too much for the league, and that was one of the reasons why scoring got so bad. And it got to the point where defense was basically impossible. Any kind of progress being impeded, any kind of contact initiated by the offense or the defense was being called a foul, and it was just completely impossible for these guys to guard anyone. But then after the All-Star break, it seems like something shifted. Again, there were conversations about this going into the break, so everybody was paying attention to this. Everybody was locked into this, trying to see what it was going to look like after the All-Star break. And definitely refs have been calling games differently, especially with that offensive initiated contact. There aren't guys just barreling into defenders and getting to the free throw line anymore. There aren't guys that are just getting, 15, 20 free throws a game necessarily anymore. And again, it got so bad that the league actually had to put out a statement and actually had to report on what exactly is happening because the dip in scoring was so noticeable. And what happened was, in January and February, the league sent out a memo. They basically instructed their officials, put more emphasis on this idea of offensive initiated contact, specifically in terms of players driving to the rim. The NBA saw this as a big enough issue to go out and tell their officials, hey, we need you to focus on this more. And they did it in the middle of the season. The league said it is going to continue to, quote, evaluate the state of offensive versus defensive balance with a focus on legal guarding position and level of contact on pathway plays to the basket, essentially saying they felt like things had gone too far in the wrong direction in terms of making it an unfavorable situation and position for a defender to be in, where all these offensive players are just barreling into guys and initiating contact and getting foul call. And they say this trend will continue to be monitored. Slower pace, style play, competitive intensity, officiating focus, etc., have all been contributing factors identified thus far. And it's just interesting to me that not only is it a situation that the league felt like they needed to change, they needed to make some adjustments, but it was so bad that they felt okay making that adjustment in the middle of the season. And it sets an interesting precedent, right, moving forward into the future, because generally speaking, the league always evaluates where the rules are at and how they would like to maybe make adjustments to some of those rules. But those conversations happen in the offseason. They'll change how the overtime rules work, or they'll change how the review process works. And they go through the competition committee and they talk about all that stuff in the offseason and they vote on it. And it's such an interesting precedent that the league is able to make some of these, smaller adjustments suddenly in the middle of the season. And imagine if you're one of these great offensive players, Trae Young is someone that comes to mind, Giannis is someone that comes to mind, that initiates all this contact and is used to getting foul calls. And for 60 games, 55 games through the middle of the year, you're getting fouls called in a certain way. And for certain guys, I think a lot of their games are actually built around getting some of these foul calls and playing that way. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the year, the rules just completely change. It's an interesting thing. I don't think it's necessarily bad for the league because how bad things had gotten with this contact and how some fouls were being called and some of these games just turning into free throw contests, teams scoring 140, 150 points, shooting 30 free throws, like that had just gotten out of control. And so I don't necessarily mind the execution of how this went about, but it's interesting how this could potentially be used in the future if the league is allowed to just change the rules. And it's interesting as well because we all know that this is a thing. This is not the first time that this has happened, because every single season, when we go from the regular season to the postseason, games are called completely differently. There's more physicality allowed in the postseason. There's less freedom of movement on the perimeter. And so we already know that that can be the case from the regular season to the postseason, but it's interesting to see it happen in the middle of the year, pre-All-Star break compared to post-All-Star break, and for it to happen in such a significant way in terms of how it impacts scoring and how it impacts foul calls, for the league to actually feel the need to put out a statement and say, yes, this is a thing that we did. We did send a memo to our officiating crews. We did talk to them about how we want them to make some adjustments with these foul calls, because NBA officiating is a huge organization. These guys are being evaluated on a daily basis. They have a percentage that is attached to these guys in terms of how many calls they get right. And for them to be able to make this kind of a big adjustment in the middle of the season is just really interesting to me, right? And officiating is unbelievably difficult. These are some of the best athletes in the entire world. A lot of these guys build their games around trying to trick you and trying to make sure that they get, fouls called as they get to the rim. Free throw shooting is one of the biggest indicators of being a high-level NBA player and a big-time NBA scorer. Free throw shooting is a big part of that. And it's really, really difficult, but it's also, these refs' jobs to not get tricked by that. And I think the NBA is definitely putting more of an emphasis on that, not only in terms of reminding them of the rules, but also maybe making some adjustments to them in the future, because this is a criticism that a lot of people have of the league right now, is that a lot of it is just revolving around free throw shooting and just hunting for fouls. And my biggest issue with it is I just want it to look like basketball, right? Like if you're getting to the rim and there's contact and you get fouled, I want them to call it, right? But if your entire goal as you're driving or as you're putting a shot up is just to get fouled, that to me needs to be eliminated. Things that don't look like basketball, where you're just running into a guy and initiating contact and not even really trying to make a move at the rim, that to me are things that need to be eliminated. And I would be totally okay with some rules adjustments in the future that make it harder for NBA players to score, that give some advantages to the defense again, that lower some of the overall scoring numbers. Because in addition to some of this freedom of movement and stuff and more fouls being called, teams have just gotten better at offense over the years. I mean, they're more efficient, they're taking a ton of threes, and scoring numbers are going to go up no matter what, even without helping them out by calling more of these fouls on some of these offensive initiated contacts. But the most interesting part of this to me by far is how this is going to potentially impact the postseason. Is it going to be even more of a physical postseason than we have seen in the past because of some of the contact that's going to be allowed as they're making these adjustments towards the end of the season? Or is it going to be something where they just go back to the regular playoff rules and it looks just like last year's did? And I don't think there's a single other league in the world that things change this much from a month-to-month basis, pre-post All-Star break or regular season to postseason, in terms of how the game is officiated and how the game is called. And if you're one of the players and you get really frustrated about this, I think we've seen some frustration here towards the end of the season. I think that makes sense because they're literally changing the rules in the middle of the season. But I also do, generally speaking, think that this is a good thing for the league to make these adjustments. Let me know down in the comment section below how you guys feel. Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think these adjustments that needed to be made? Or do you think that this is just a terrible idea and a terrible precedent for the league to set, that they can just change the rules right in the middle of the season?